Karen called the HOA on me. I dissolved the entire HOA overnight. Karen thought she had me cornered when she called the HOA about my violations. She smirked as the board president handed me a stack of fines totaling $8,000, threatening foreclosure if I didn't comply within 30 days. What Karen didn't know was that I'd been quietly buying up every delinquent HOA account in the neighborhood for pennies on the dollar. By morning, I owned 60% of the community and the legal right to dissolve the entire HOA with a single vote. Meet Sarah Chen, a 34-year-old software engineer who bought her dream home in Willowbrook Estates 3 years ago. After working 16-hour days at a tech startup, she finally had enough savings for the perfect 2-story colonial with a small workshop in the garage where she restores vintage electronics as a hobby. Willowbrook seemed ideal: mature oak trees, well-maintained streets, and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. The HOA fees were reasonable at $150 monthly, and the rules seemed standard: no commercial vehicles, maintain your lawn, keep your home exterior in good condition. Sarah followed every rule religiously. She hired a lawn service, painted her shutters the approved shade of forest green, and even got written approval before installing new porch lights. Her property became one of the neighborhood showcases, with carefully maintained gardens and a pristine driveway. But Sarah had one passion project that would soon put her in Karen Mitchell's crosshairs. In her garage workshop, she restored classic electronics, vintage radios, old computers, retro gaming systems. Twice a week, small delivery trucks would drop off carefully packaged items she'd purchased online. Sarah always had them delivered to her garage to avoid cluttering her front porch. Karen Mitchell lived directly across the street and had appointed herself the neighborhood's unofficial watch captain. A retired insurance adjuster with too much time on her hands, Karen spent her days cataloging every perceived violation through her living room window. She kept detailed logs of when neighbors put out their trash cans, how long visitors stayed parked on the street, and whether anyone's grass exceeded the HOA's 3-inch height limit. What Karen didn't know was that Sarah's tech background had taught her to research everything thoroughly. When she bought her house, Sarah didn't just read the HOA documents. She studied the incorporation papers, reviewed the financial statements, and even looked up property records for the entire neighborhood. During her research, Sarah discovered something interesting. Willowbrook HOA was struggling financially. Several homeowners had fallen behind on dues during the recession and never caught up. The HOA had liens on multiple properties but lacked the resources to foreclose. These delinquent accounts were legally for sale to anyone willing to pay the back taxes and fees. Sarah filed this information away, never imagining she'd need it. She just wanted to live peacefully, work on her electronics, and enjoy her home, but Karen had been watching those delivery trucks with growing irritation. In her mind, Sarah was clearly running some kind of business from her garage, which violated the HOA's commercial activity restrictions. Karen had been building a case, taking photos, recording delivery times, and preparing for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came on a sunny Tuesday morning when Sarah had 3 packages delivered in one day, a rare find she'd been tracking for months. Finally located through different sellers, Karen saw her opportunity and immediately called an emergency HOA board meeting. What happens next would change Willowbrook Estates forever. The knock on Sarah's door came at 7:30 on a Wednesday evening. Just as she was settling down with dinner, through the peephole, she saw 3 people in business attire holding clipboards. The HOA board of directors, Ms. Chen. "We need to discuss some violations that have been brought to our attention," announced board president Robert Hayes, a pompous real estate agent who treated HOA meetings like corporate board presentations. Sarah opened the door, genuinely confused. "Violations? I haven't received any notices. We're delivering them now," said Treasurer Linda Walsh, a stern woman who managed the community's finances with an iron fist. She handed Sarah an official-looking document with the HOA letterhead. The violation notice was 2 pages long and utterly ridiculous. Sarah was being cited for operating a commercial business from residential property, excessive delivery vehicle traffic, and storage of commercial inventory in violation of community standards. The evidence: Karen's photograph showing delivery trucks in Sarah's driveway and her signed statement claiming she'd observed suspicious commercial activity for months. This is insane. Sarah said, reading through the charges, "I restore electronics as a hobby. Everything I buy is for personal use. The covenant clearly states no commercial activities." Hayes replied coldly, "These deliveries suggest otherwise. You have 15 days to cease all commercial operations and pay the initial fine of $1,200. Sarah's jaw dropped. $1,200. For what? Buying things online. The fine structure is clearly outlined in the HOA documents you signed, Walsh added. Continued violations will result in additional penalties of $500 per occurrence. After the board left, Sarah immediately called her neighbor Tom Rodriguez, a retired teacher who served on the Architectural Review Committee. Tom had always been friendly and reasonable. "Sarah, I'm sorry you're dealing with this," Tom said over the phone. "Between you and me, Karen Mitchell has been pushing the board to crack down on what she calls suspicious activities. She's convinced you're running some kind of online business, but I'm not. I restore old electronics for fun. It's like people who restore classic cars. I believe you, but Karen has Hayes and Walsh convinced. She's been documenting everything. Delivery times, package sizes, even the license plates of the trucks. She presented it like you were running Amazon out of your garage." Sarah felt a chill. "What can I do?" "Attend the next board meeting and present your case. Bring evidence that you're not selling anything. But I'll warn you, Karen will be there, and she's prepared for war. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare." Karen escalated her surveillance, positioning herself in her front yard whenever deliveries arrived. She took photos of Sarah bringing packages into her garage and even followed the delivery drivers to ask what they were delivering. Sarah tried to document her hobby activities, printing purchase receipts and photos of her restoration projects. But when the HOA board meeting arrived, she faced a kangaroo court. The meeting was held in the community center, with about 20 residents in attendance. Karen had recruited several neighbors who barely knew Sarah, but were easily swayed by her presentation about protecting property values from commercial intrusion. "Miss Chen has turned her garage into a warehouse," Karen declared, projecting her photos on a screen. "Look at these delivery trucks, sometimes 3 in one day. This is clearly a business operation disguising itself as a hobby." When Sarah stood to defend herself, showing before and after photos of vintage radios she'd restored, Karen interrupted repeatedly. "Anyone can claim they're not selling these items," Karen said, "but the evidence speaks for itself. Commercial deliveries, storage of inventory, and suspicious activity that disrupts our peaceful community." The board voted for 2-1 to uphold the violations and add additional fines for failure to comply. During the investigation period, Sarah's total penalty jumped to $3,200. Furthermore, Hayes announced any future delivery activity will be considered willful violation of HOA covenants, subject to immediate legal action. As Sarah walked to her car that night, Karen approached with a smug smile. "Nothing personal, dear," Karen said, "but rules are rules. Maybe you should find a hobby that doesn't involve turning our neighborhood into a shipping district." That's when Sarah decided it was time to do some serious research. Karen and the HOA board had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Sarah thought the harassment might stop if she simply laid low for a while. She was wrong. Karen Mitchell had tasted blood, and the HOA board was emboldened by their victory. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Sarah received another violation notice. This time, Karen had reported her for unauthorized exterior modifications. claiming the small security camera Sarah had installed to monitor her own driveway was a violation of architectural standards. The fine, $800, plus a demand to remove the camera within 7 days. Sarah called the HOA office immediately. I never got approval for the camera because the covenants don't mention security cameras anywhere in the architectural guidelines, she explained to Linda Walsh. The board has determined that all exterior installations require pre-approval. Walsh replied curtly, "Your failure to seek permission demonstrates a pattern of disregard for community standards, but my next-door neighbor has 3 security cameras, and the Johnsons have a Ring doorbell. Are you fining them too? Those installations were grandfathered in," Walsh said after a pause. Sarah knew this was a lie. The Johnsons had installed their Ring doorbell just 6 months ago, and she'd watched them do it. The following week brought another notice. Karen had complained that Sarah's excessive use of her garage was creating noise disturbances. The evidence: Karen claimed she could hear power, tools, and machinery from Sarah's electronics restoration work. This fine was $1,500 for disruptive activities in violation of quiet enjoyment provisions. Sarah was furious. She'd measured the sound levels with a decibel meter app. Her soldering iron and small hand tools barely registered above normal conversation levels. Meanwhile, her neighbor 3 houses down ran a table saw in his garage every weekend building furniture. But Karen had never complained about him. At the next board meeting, Sarah came prepared with documentation. She brought sound level measurements, photos proving other neighbors had similar security setups, and even testimonials from adjacent neighbors stating they'd never heard excessive noise. None of it mattered. Karen had prepared a PowerPoint presentation titled "Protecting Willowbrook's Family-Friendly Environment." She'd somehow convinced for other residents to sign a petition claiming Sarah's activities were incompatible with residential use. Ms. Chen continues to treat our community like her personal industrial zone, Karen declared to the packed meeting room. First it was the commercial deliveries, then unauthorized surveillance equipment, and now we have reports of manufacturing activities at all hours. I work with a 40-watt soldering iron, Sarah protested. It's quieter than a hairdryer. The impact isn't just about noise, board president Hayes interjected. It's about maintaining the residential character of our community. Your activities suggest a fundamental misunderstanding of what Willowbrook represents. The board not only upheld all existing fines, but added a new penalty. Sarah was now prohibited from using her garage for any activities other than parking vehicles and standard storage. Any tools, electronics, or commercial equipment had to be removed within 30 days. The total fines now exceeded $6,500. After the meeting, Sarah overheard Karen talking to Linda Walsh in the parking lot. "Once we get her garage cleared out, we can start addressing the real issue," Karen said. "Her property values are already dropping because of all this drama. If she can't pay the fines, we can put a lien on her house and force a sale to someone more compatible with our community standards." Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was a coordinated campaign to force her out of her own home. That night, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She'd been raised by parents who taught her to fight smart, not just fight hard. Her father had always said, when someone tries to use the system against you, make sure you understand that system better than they do. Sarah spent the entire weekend at the county courthouse, the public library, and online legal databases. She requested every document related to Willowbrook HOA's incorporation, financing, and legal standing. She studied property records, lien documents, and foreclosure filings going back 15 years. What she discovered made her smile for the first time in weeks. Karen Mitchell and the HOA board thought they were playing chess, but they'd just picked a fight with someone who was about to flip the entire board. Sarah's research revealed something that made her heart race with excitement. Willowbrook HOA was financially vulnerable in ways the current board didn't even understand. During the 2008 recession, 11 homeowners had fallen behind on their HOA dues. The association had filed liens but never followed through with foreclosures due to lack of funds and legal complications. These delinquent accounts had been sitting dormant for over a decade, accruing interest and penalties. Under state law, anyone could purchase these delinquent HOA accounts by paying the back dues, interest, and associated fees to the county. Once purchased, the Bureau acquired all the HOA voting rights associated with those properties, even if the original homeowners still lived there. Sarah did the math. The 11 delinquent accounts represented 37% of the community's voting power. Combined with her own property, she would control 38%, not enough to dissolve the HOA, which required a 60% majority. But then Sarah discovered something even better. 3 more homeowners had recently fallen behind due to job losses during the pandemic. The HOA board, focused on harassing Sarah, had been lax about collecting these newer delinquencies. These accounts were also available for purchase. If Sarah bought all 14 delinquent accounts, she would control 57% of the voting power, still 3% short of the dissolution threshold. That's when Sarah remembered something from her original research. The HOA's own corporate documents contained a provision that allowed dissolution with a simple majority vote if the association was deemed financially insolvent or unable to fulfill its fiduciary duties. Sarah spent the next week documenting the HOA board's financial mismanagement. Linda Walsh had been paying herself excessive administrative fees. Robert Hayes had approved landscaping contracts with his own real estate clients without competitive bidding, and the association had been operating without proper insurance for over a year. More importantly, the harassment campaign against Sarah had cost the HOA over $4,000 in legal fees for violation notices and administrative processing of money that came directly out of the reserve fund meant for community maintenance. Sarah calculated the total cost of purchasing all 14 delinquent accounts, $28,000. It was a significant chunk of her savings, but far less than the legal fees she'd face fighting the HOA's harassment in court. On a Tuesday morning, Sarah walked into the county clerk's office with a cashier's check and purchase agreements for every delinquent HOA account in Willowbrook Estates. By noon, she legally owned 57% of the community's voting rights, but Sarah wasn't done. She discovered one more crucial detail in the HOA's bylaws. Any homeowner could call for a special dissolution vote with just 48 hours notice, provided they submitted proper documentation of financial irregularities or board misconduct. Sarah had documented both. That afternoon, she hand-delivered dissolution notices to every homeowner in Willowbrook, along with a detailed summary of the board's financial mismanagement and the harassment campaign against her. The vote would be held Friday evening. Karen Mitchell had no idea what was coming. Friday evening arrived with an atmosphere of confusion and tension in the Willowbrook Community Center. Word had spread quickly about Sarah's dissolution proposal, and nearly every homeowner in the neighborhood showed up, the largest HOA meeting attendance in the community's history. Karen Mitchell sat in the front row with a smug expression, flanked by board president Hayes and treasurer Walsh. They'd spent the week telling neighbors that Sarah's dissolution notice was legally meaningless and the desperate action of someone facing legitimate consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, Hayes called the meeting to order. We're here to address Ms. Chen's frivolous attempt to disrupt our community governance. This dissolution proposal has no legal standing and, actually, Mr. Hayes, Sarah interrupted, standing up with a folder full of documents. I think we need to clarify a few things about legal standing. Sarah walked to the front of the room and connected her laptop to the projector. The first slide showed the HOA's current financial statement. Over the past year, this board has spent over $12,000 on what they call compliance enforcement. Sarah began. $4,000 of that was spent specifically on harassment notices against me, money that came directly from the reserve fund meant for community maintenance. Murmurs rippled through the room. Many residents had been wondering why promised sidewalk repairs and landscape improvements had been delayed. But here's the really interesting part. Sarah continued, clicking to the next slide. Mr. Hayes has approved over $15,000 in landscaping contracts with Premier Property Services, a company owned by his business partner. These contracts were never put out for competitive bidding, as required by our own financial policies. Hayes shot to his feet. This is a witch hunt. Those contracts were necessary community improvements. Were they? Sarah asked, displaying before and after photos. Because I have documentation showing that Premier Property Services charged us $8,000 to plant 12 shrubs that Home Depot sells for $40 each. The math doesn't add up, Mr. Hayes. The room erupted in angry voices. Sarah waited for quiet before continuing, and Mrs. Walsh, perhaps you'd like to explain why you've been paying yourself a monthly administrative fee of $800 for HOA management, when our governing documents specify that board positions are volunteer only. Linda Walsh's face turned red. Those are legitimate reimbursements for what? Sarah interrupted. I have copies of every expense report. You charged the HOA for office supplies that included a coffee maker for your home office, lunch expenses for personal meetings, and even mileage reimbursement for driving to your own grocery store. The crowd was getting angrier. Neighbors who had been paying HOA dues faithfully were discovering their money had been systematically mismanaged. But Sarah's real bombshell was still coming. Now, about this dissolution vote, Sarah said, clicking to a new slide showing property ownership records. Some of you might be wondering how I have the authority to call for this vote. Karen Mitchell stood up, her voice shrill with anger. She doesn't. This whole meeting is illegal. Sarah Chen is just one homeowner trying to destroy our community because she got caught breaking the rules. Sarah smiled. Actually, Karen, I'm not just one homeowner anymore. The projector displayed a county records document showing Sarah's recent purchases. As of Tuesday, I own the HOA voting rights for 14 properties in this community. I purchased all the delinquent accounts that this board failed to properly manage over the past decade. The room fell silent. Even Hayes looked stunned. That gives me controlling interest in 57% of Willowbrook estates, Sarah continued. More than enough to call this dissolution vote, and more than enough to approve it. Karen's face went white. That's impossible. You can't just buy voting rights. Actually, I can, Sarah replied calmly. It's all perfectly legal under state HOA law. When homeowners fall behind on dues and the board fails to collect them, those voting rights become available for purchase. I simply paid what these homeowners owed. She turned to address the entire room. Now, we have a choice. We can dissolve this HOA tonight and start fresh with proper oversight and financial transparency. Or we can continue with a board that has systematically mismanaged your money and used HOA powers for personal harassment. Tom Rodriguez, the retired teacher who had always been fair, raised his hand. What happens to the neighborhood if we dissolve? Nothing changes except the corruption, Sarah answered. We can form a new association with proper checks and balances, or simply operate as a regular neighborhood without HOA restrictions. Property values won't be affected. They'll probably improve once we stop wasting money on harassment campaigns. When the vote was called, it wasn't even close. 68% voted to dissolve the HOA immediately. Karen Mitchell stormed out without saying a word. By morning, Willowbrook HOA would cease to exist. The dissolution of Willowbrook HOA sent shock waves through the neighborhood, but not in the way Karen Mitchell had predicted. Instead of chaos and declining property values, something unexpected happened. The community came together like never before within a week of the dissolution vote. Tom Rodriguez organized an informal neighborhood committee to address the transition. Unlike the old HOA board's secretive meetings and arbitrary decisions, this group operated with complete transparency. The irony is beautiful, Tom told Sarah over coffee the following Saturday. Karen spent months trying to destroy you for disrupting community harmony, but dissolving the HOA actually brought everyone together. He was right. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other were suddenly collaborating on shared concerns. The Johnsons offered to organize a neighborhood watch program. The retired couple on Maple Street volunteered to coordinate a community garden in the small common area. Even the teenagers started a lawn care service for elderly residents, but the real satisfaction came from watching the former board members face consequences for their actions. Robert Hayes discovered that his landscaping contracts were now under scrutiny by the entire neighborhood when residents learned he'd been paying his business partner inflated prices for substandard work. Several homeowners filed complaints with the State Real Estate Commission. Hayes' real estate license was suspended pending investigation, and Premier Property Services lost 3 major contracts when word spread about the overcharging. Linda Walsh faced even worse consequences. The neighborhood committee requested a forensic audit of the dissolved HOA's finances, revealing that her administrative fees totaled over $15,000 in unauthorized payments to herself. The committee referred the matter to the county prosecutor's office for potential embezzlement charges, but Karen Mitchell's downfall was the most poetic. 3 days after the dissolution vote, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. A well-dressed woman in her 50s knocked on her door, introducing herself as Margaret Chen, no relation. Despite the shared surname, I represent the Willowbrook Property Management Group, Margaret explained. We've been hired by several homeowners to explore forming a new, properly managed community association. Sarah was intrigued. What kind of association? One with real oversight, transparent finances, and reasonable rules, Margaret replied. But here's the thing, we need someone with legal knowledge and community respect to serve on the interim board. Your neighbors have been recommending you, Sarah almost laughed. 6 months ago, they were voting to fine me into bankruptcy. That wasn't your neighbors, Margaret said. That was Karen Mitchell and her puppet board. Most residents had no idea what was happening until you exposed it all. Over the next month, Sarah learned just how isolated Karen had become. The neighbors who had signed her petition against Sarah's electronics hobby admitted they'd been pressured and hadn't really understood what they were signing. The delivery drivers Karen had harassed reported her behavior to their supervisors, leading to official complaints. Most damaging of all, Karen's own neighbor, the one with the weekend table, saw she'd never complained about her, revealed that Karen had tried to recruit him to file false noise complaints against Sarah in exchange for Karen's support when he wanted to add a deck to his house. She straight up told me it was about getting rid of the wrong kind of people in the neighborhood. He told the neighborhood committee. When I asked what she meant, she said Sarah was too independent and didn't respect authority. The new Willowbrook Community Association formed 3 months later with Sarah as treasurer and Tom Rodriguez as president. The new bylaws included strict financial oversight, term limits for board members, and a transparent appeals process for any rule violations. Karen Mitchell's house went on the market shortly after, according to the Real Estate Gossip Network. She claimed she was moving to be closer to family, but everyone knew the truth. She'd become a pariah in her own neighborhood the day the for sale sign went up in Karen's yard. Sarah was in her garage workshop, peacefully restoring a 1970s calculator she'd found at an estate sale. A delivery truck pulled up with another package, a vintage radio she'd won in an online auction. As the driver handed her the package, he grinned. You're the lady who took down the crazy HOA, right? My whole route heard about it. Good for you. Sarah smiled, watching Karen's curtains twitch as she peered out at the delivery truck one last time. Some battles are won with lawyers and litigation. Others are won by simply knowing the rules better than the bullies who try to abuse them. The sweet taste of justice, Sarah decided, was worth every penny of those $28,000. 6 months later, Willowbrook is thriving under its new community association. Property values have actually increased, and the neighborhood has become a model for transparent, resident-focused governance. Sarah still restores electronics in her garage, and her hobby has even inspired a small electronics club that meets monthly in the community center. The real lesson from Sarah's victory isn't about revenge, it's about the power of knowledge and preparation. When bullies try to use systems of authority against you, your best defense is understanding those systems better than they do. Karen Mitchell learned that harassment disguised as rule enforcement eventually backfires. The HOA board discovered that financial mismanagement and abuse of power have real consequences. And Sarah proved that sometimes the best way to change a corrupt system is to replace it entirely. Have you ever faced a power-hungry HOA or dealt with a neighborhood Karen who made your life miserable? Share your story in the comments below. We love hearing how ordinary people stand up to extraordinary bullies. And if you enjoyed this tale of justice served cold, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of people who refused to back down when the system tried to steamroll them. Next week, we'll explore what happens when an HOA tries to foreclose on a veteran's home and discovers he's been quietly documenting their illegal activities for years. Trust me, you won't want to miss that epic showdown.